Well, my sermon title this morning is called The Great Commission Field of Me, a sermon by Scott Denman for Scott Denman. I could not help but smile at those images of the royal wedding we enjoyed before this service started. Given that the Episcopal Church has its roots in Anglicanism, it reminded me of our deep roots in cultural reserve, a stiff upper lip mindset, moderation, and traditional sophistication. It certainly reminded me of how white our roots are and how our genetic makeup certainly must include imperialist chromosomes, given that we tend to know what is best for someone else. We often use the word baggage as slang for unresolved issues, blind spots, and shall we say, growing edges. And years ago, in a conversation with another devout Episcopalian, I had suggested that the Episcopal Church has a lot of baggage. He replied, "Episcopalians do not have baggage. We have luggage," which really made the point that we do indeed have baggage, even if it is matching baggage. But as promised by my sermon title, this is not going to be a sermon about anyone but me. Now, sometimes people say to me that they felt my sermon was being preached directly to them. That always makes me smile. In my more mischievous moments, and I have many, I'm tempted to say, it was. I wrote that sermon specifically for you. God told me to say that to you. But the truth is that my sermons are the most selfish time of the week for me. They are always about me. I apologize. There are times when I feel that I am preaching to the proverbial choir, but isn't that phrase revealing? It implies that preaching is about changing someone, convincing someone to a different way of seeing things, and preaching to the choir has come to mean preaching to those who already believe what you are saying. It also assumes that the choir agrees with the preacher. But our choir has a long way to go to qualify on that front. That's why I love you guys. Preaching to myself is a reminder that real change in the world has to start with me. This truth is found in the readings for today. If you tuned in last week, I kind of made a big deal about the Great Commission. It was great. Pentecost opened up a mission field to the entire planet by crossing every language barrier, inspiring people to go into the unknown and venture into new lands. That is a great commission. But this morning, I get a reality check. I like to call it the hard commission. This Jesus I know, who is always modeling how much larger God is than my own perspective, actually tells his disciples to not go to certain places. Don't cross certain boundaries yet. He says, go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. As you go, proclaim the good news. Obviously, I know that Jesus' hope for the world, which he modeled, was to create a human community of love and respect by breaking down barriers between all peoples. But Jesus also knew that the good news would get lost in preachiness if the disciples spoke of change before they themselves had changed. Here I'm reminded of that phrase, "Physician, heal thyself." A phrase Jesus himself uttered when he was experiencing how a prophet is not welcomed in his hometown. It seems that the hardest thing is to preach to one's own people precisely because they don't accept us as prophets. And this challenges us to heal ourselves. We're too close. Personally, I would rather be called to the Great Commission to spread the good news to others rather than to first be called to preach the good news to those like me. That's why I call this the hard commission. Nothing glamorous about it. And that is why Jesus goes on to paint a picture of hardship and challenge for those who accept that call. But the hard commission is what gets me to pay attention to myself, because it may be that I am the first mission field, not my household, not my people. That is my challenge today. What is good news to Scott Denman? If I discover that, perhaps it might find a resonance with you, but that's up to God, not me. This is especially important now in this time of profound upheaval in response to racism. I say to myself, I should get back to work on issues of structural racism. But I also ask myself, when did, or more importantly, why did I stop working on racial healing? I guess I got busy with other things. Why is that? Of course, the murder of George Floyd is burned into my mind and heart, but there's another image that is just as haunting to me. The other officers standing there watching. Systemic racism might be defined as a form of oppression supported by silence and inaction. I don't want to be an observer shaking my head, but again, the level of my passion for doing something will equal the depth of my self-examination. It has to start with me. For example, my reaction to the president saying that he was the least racist person he knew started with profound sarcasm and disgust, but eventually revealed something about me. Therapists tell us that our emotional reaction to others sometimes says more about ourselves than it does about those that are pissing us off. Eventually, his comments introduced me to that part of myself that was whispering from within, saying, I too am the least racist person I know. This is so human to be defensive when being attacked. Do you remember when the Apostle Paul did this? His leadership was being questioned in Corinth. His authenticity was being questioned, and he pushes back with a kind of arrogant rant by sharing his complete resume. You really should read the whole thing in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. But here's a section of it. He says, whatever anyone else dares to boast about, and he says, I'm speaking as a fool, because he's uncomfortable proclaiming his goodness. He said, I also dare to boast about. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? And then he says, I'm out of my mind to talk like this. But he says, are they servants of Christ? I am more. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from the Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at the sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled, and I have gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst. I have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face the daily pressure of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak, and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin, and I do not inwardly burn? I am so moved by his passion because I understand it. That's me. When my devotion and love is questioned, that's me. Racism in me? If anyone is not a racist, I am. In college, after a friendship developed between me and the president of the Black Student Union, we designed a forum for the entire student body, bringing together whites and blacks to discuss racism. I went on to co-lead small groups on campus studying James Cone's work on Black liberation theology. I was clergy co-founder of Genesis, an organization that continues to bring together blacks and whites and Asians and Hispanics to work on issues of justice. I live in East Oakland, where every one of my immediate neighbors are people of color, mostly African Americans, who often come over for a glass of something, and we actively discuss racism and gentrification and white privilege and, yes, white fragility. Sound a little fragile myself, don't I? We have thrown large parties in our house where we are the only white people. My African American neighbors have invited me to speak in their churches. I worked for and was proudly ordained into the priesthood by a rather famous African American woman, Barbara Harris, the first woman Episcopal bishop. After a very honest conversation about racism one Lent with a sister African American church, we all processed together with the chief of police and a council member from City Hall to police headquarters, and we prayed for our city and police that justice might flow down like a river. Sounds to me that I just might be the least racist person I know. Like Paul, I too go on rants when my devotion is questioned. It's hard for someone with luggage to admit they have baggage. It's even harder to think that that baggage has allowed racism to deepen in our community. But even Paul, after his rant, concludes by saying that what he has done amounts to nothing. And his real boast is in his weakness, in his reliance on God, who will continue to do a deep work in his heart if he just opened that heart anew to listen. Scott, I know you have always said you are a work in progress, but you can't really claim that if you are not making any progress, or if you are not working. You have to stay at it. Remember that even Jesus had to repent from racism toward the Syrophoenician woman. After he referred to her as a dog, what followed was a peaceful protest from her, reminding him that even the dogs eat the crumbs from the table. And what follows from her words is a conversion of sorts in Jesus, whose eyes were opened and he saw in her nothing but faith. She helped him. He humbled himself. Scott, let others help you be a better person during this turbulent time. Don't give others the crumbs. Invite them to sit at the table of your heart and listen. This coming week, you will all receive a very heartfelt letter from your senior warden, Victoria Robinson, that shares deeply about the pain that racism has brought into her family. This will be part of an invitation to join a conversation about racism. I hope you take the time to read her letter and also respond to the request to gather and discuss how we, as a predominantly white congregation, can respond to the realities of racism. People of luggage, unite. Let's look at our baggage and see if being missionaries to ourselves will lead to a much better commission than we could ever imagine. Amen.